Alan. There's 3. So plus 3. As we, the leaders of this country, gather once again towards the common goal of serving your people. Our gracious God, we humbly seek for wisdom and strength as we solve issues and challenges that may come our way. May the light of your Spirit shine upon our ideas, discussions, and deliberation, and be our supreme guide as we work together for the good of all. In the decisions that we make for the sake of those who have placed their trust and confidence in us. Grant unto servants the diligence and focus to craft and enact policies, strong will and determination in seeking the higher interest of our nation. We ask all this in your name. Amen. The Secretary called the roll.
Gingona.
Senator Peter 3, who dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, before we move for the...
Congressman Anton del Rosario of Davao del Norte.
We also have Councilor Romel Ayuson of Montalban. And we have staff, congressional staff from...
EU Broadcasting Corporation granted Rica, Villar, Noel, and Ridon as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on the disagreeing provisions of House Number 4275 entitled An Act defining the role of the Department of Labor and Employment, DOLE, and the local government units, LGUs, in the establishment and operation of the Public Employment Service Office, PESO, and the operation of job placement offices by non-government organizations, NGOs, and state universities and colleges, SUCs, amending for the purpose sections 3, 6, 7, and 9 of RA numbers 8759, otherwise known as the Public Employment Service Office Act of 1999, and Senate number 1386 entitled An Act defining the role of the DOLE of the Department of Labor and Employment and the local government units and accredited non-government organizations in the establishment and operation of the Public Employment Service Office and the operation of job offices in education institutions, amending for the purpose sections 3, 5, 6, 7, and 9 of RA 8759, otherwise known as Public Employment Service Office Act of 1999.
Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing this
Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
Committee reports. Committee report number 165, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance on House number 1772, introduced by Representative Violago et al., entitled An Act creating 2 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court in the 3rd Region to be stationed in the Science City of Muñoz and in the Municipality of Rizal, Province of Nueva Ecija, further section para Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and Nueva Ecija for purpose section 14 para in Human Rights and Finance on House number 1980, introduced by 80 as amended of Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendments sponsored Senator Pimentel III.
Ordinary business.
Committee report number 167, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance on House number 2094, introduced by Representative Villarica et al., entitled An Act creating an additional regional trial court branch in the 3rd Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Mekawayan, Province of Bulacan, amending for the purpose Section 14, Paragraph C of Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendments, sponsor Senator Pimentel III.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee report number 168, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance on House number 2186, introduced by Representative Loyola et al., entitled An Act converting the existing 5th Municipal Circuit Trial Court of Carmona, General Mariano Alvarez Cavite, into a municipal trial court with seat at the Municipality of Carmona, and creating a separate municipal trial court for the Municipality of General Mariano Alvarez, amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980 as amended, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendment, sponsor Senator Pimentel III.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Committee Report number 169, submitted jointly by the Committees on Justice and Human Rights and Finance on House number 2260, introduced by Representative Aliping et al., entitled An Act Creating 2 Additional Branches of the Municipal Trial Court in Cities and 2 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court in the 1st Judicial Region to be stationed in the city of Baguio, further amending for the purpose Batas Pambansa Bilang 129 as amended, otherwise known as the Judiciary Reorganization Act of 1980, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendments. Sponsor Senator Pimentel III.
Calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2361, that we transfer the said bill under Committee Report number 103 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. I so move. This is the bill, Mr. President, repealing Section 55 of the Omnibus Election Code.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, Committee Report number 103, reporting out Senate Bill 2361, is hereby transferred from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2361 under Committee Report 103.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of Senate Bill 2361 under Committee Report 103 is in order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Bill number 2361, an act repealing Section 55 of Batas Pambansa Bilang 881, otherwise known as the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines as amended, and mandating the Commission on Elections to provide for the office spaces of its field offices.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Pimentel to sponsor the measure.
Senator Pimentel is recognized.
Mr. President and my esteemed colleagues, good afternoon. I stand before you today to sponsor and humbly seek your support for the passage of Senate Bill number 2361, an act repealing Section 55 of Batas Pambansa 881, otherwise known as the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines as amended, and mandating the COMELEC, or the Commission on Elections, to provide for the office spaces of its field offices. Mr. President, in a democratic country such as the Philippines, expression of the will is the free expression of the people is a given. Their leaders in every election. It bears emphasizing that the of a clean, honest, and orderly of democracy. Under Article 9-A, Section 1 of the 1980 Constitution, the COMELEC is an independent constitutional commission, insulated from the biases of politics and protected from the encroachment of self-serving and political interests. An independent COMELEC is the vanguard of our people's right to vote. It falls on us in the legislative branch to craft the necessary legislation to shield the COMELEC from any threats to its constitutionally mandated independence, or to provide corrective measures to any existing or perceived threats. Actual or perceived, real or potential, any threat to the independence of the COMELEC must be addressed. A threat to this independence of the COMELEC is a threat to the right of suffrage of every Filipino. This objective was recognized by the Supreme Court in its pronouncement in the case of Lacson Jr. versus Posadas. In that case, the Supreme Court said that in our republican system of government, the exercise by the people of their right to suffrage is the expression of their sovereign will. It is therefore absolutely essential that the free and voluntary use of this right be effectively protected by law and by governmental authority. Mr. President, one perceived threat to the independence of the COMELEC is Section 55, of Batas Pambansa bilang 881. That is the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines as amended. In essence, Section 55 mandates local government units, LGUs, to provide a suitable place for the respective offices of the provincial election supervisor and the election registrar and their staff. Section 55 likewise states that in the event that the LGU fails to provide such suitable offices, the rentals thereon shall be chargeable to the funds of the LGU concerned. This setup, deeply ensconced in Section 55, makes election officers and poll personnel vulnerable to harassment by local leaders or local politicians. In fact, COMELEC confirmed that its local personnel in some LGUs have experienced being treated unfairly if they do not accede to requests or demands of public officials having control of the budget or the real properties of the LGU. The potential for incumbent public officials to have a certain degree of influence over COMELEC election officers is highlighted by the fact that of the 1,715 COMELEC field offices in the local government units nationwide, around 1,707 offices are provided for by the LGUs. That means that at present, only 8 offices are provided for by the COMELEC itself for its field offices in the LGUs, the provinces, the cities, and municipalities. Verily, it becomes imperative that we sever the tie or make sure that there is no tie that binds the referee in the elections and those running, the players who we will consider as the players, the contestants for elective positions. Essentially, we will be equalizing the playing field between the incumbent, who has perceived advantages, and the challengers. Mr. President, the proposed bill, Senate Bill number 2361, seeks to address the peril to the constitutionally guaranteed independence of the COMELEC by repealing Section 55 of the Omnibus Election Code as amended. Correspondingly, the COMELEC will be directed to provide for the office spaces of its field units, specifically the municipal election offices, the city election offices, and the provincial election offices. At first glance, the numbers involved are quite staggering, considering that we have 81 provinces and close to 1,600 cities and municipalities. That's more or less 1,600. So that means that is around 1,700 new offices that the COMELEC must provide itself. Based on the data supplied by the COMELEC, the estimated total annual rentals for the COMELEC field offices are more or less 447,240,000 pesos. Therefore, it is incumbent on my part that I discuss in passing the financial mechanisms we have placed in our proposed bill to address these financial requirements. As provided under Section 3 of the proposed bill, the amount necessary for the implementation and enforcement of the Act shall be charged against the current year or from any available savings of the COMELEC. The current year appropriations or from any available savings of the COMELEC. Thereafter, such amount as may be necessary for the continued implementation of the Act shall be included in the annual General Appropriations Act. By itself, the amount involved in implementing this Act might be big, but looking at the bigger picture and the objective of this Act, the said amount is a reasonable price to pay for the continuing independence of the COMELEC, considering that this independence impacts on our people's exercise of their right to choose their leaders now and in the future. Democracy has a price, and we should be willing to pay it. When the electorate is given the opportunity to freely make their choices in an electoral atmosphere devoid of fear and bereft of coercion and characterized by a level playing field, the resulting government becomes stamped with the imprimatur of the people. Such a government fully and rightfully reflects the true will of the people and the authority and the sovereignty represented by each ballot cast. The result may not necessarily be democracy at its best, but this is certainly democracy at work. Hence, this representation humbly asks for the approval of this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. President and my colleagues.
One. Majority Leader?
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2361 under Committee Report 103.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Mr. President, may we suspend session for 1 minute?
No need suspension. No basic problem with that. I'm just saying that for criminal cases, then
Okay, we are ready to resume, Mr. President.
session is resumed.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2669 under Committee Report number 104.
Any objection? Hearing none. Resumption of the consideration of Senate Bill 2669 is in order.
This is the bill on Tax Incentives Management and Transparency Act, and the parliamentary status of the measure is that we closed the period of committee amendments on May 25, 2015. I thus move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Angara.
Senator Angara is recognized. Is there any individual amendment, Senator Angara?
No one has signified, Mr. President, because those who signified, we adopted them as committee amendments.
All right. There are no individual amendments being proposed. Majority Leader.
In that case, Mr. President, I move that we close the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is terminated.
So I move that we approve Senate Bill number 2669 under Committee Report number 104 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill number 2669 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2669 under Committee Report number 104.
So suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4292 under Committee Report number 67. This is the bill on the Misamis Occidental Sports Academy.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the measure is in order.
The parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered his sponsorship speech last May 13, 2015. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Angara.
Senator Angara is recognized.
We're ready, Mr. President, but I don't believe anyone has
Any
member.
member of the chamber who has signified his intention to avail of the period for interpellation Senator Osmeña is
Osmeña.
raising his hand. Senator Osmeña is therefore recognized in the period of interpellation.
Thank you, Mr. President. My questions would not only cover House Bill 4292, 605, House Bill number 41, House Bill number 4307. These are all similar bills establishing sports academies in the capital of certain provinces. It's just a broad question, Mr. President. Will any national funds be obligated to fund this?
Mr. President, just for the training of the athletes, because the PSC is mandated to provide training. So indirectly, the PSC will give it to the sports agencies, the NSAs.
So it will come out of the PSC budget.
For training, meaning they will send coaches, they will send...
Other than those,
there are grants that may be given. Those have to go through the PSC. But the local governments involved in the respective bills have committed to devote resources for construction of the facilities, Mr. President.
well, I was just hoping that we would look forward and consider that there are 210 congressional districts, and they may be establishing one per congressional district in the future, and the Philippine government will not be in a position to fund 210 high school sports academies. So I thank you for that response. So with that in mind, I hereby terminate all my reservations on all those bills to interpolate. Thank you.
Well, I thank the gentleman of Cebu, the gentleman from Cebu, the chairman of the Committees on Banks, Energy and Public Services, for his manifestation. And I do share his concern that it would be difficult if each legislative district were to put up a sports center. And certainly we must have some rhyme or reason in providing. And I'd like to place on the record, Mr. President, that each of the 5 bills belongs in a different region of the country.
Okay. All right.
So-
Yes, Majority Leader.
So, there being no more interpellators, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4292 under Committee Report number 67.
So suspended. So terminated.
May I ask for a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Suspended for 1 minute.
Okay ka lang. Ito lang ba? Over. Okay. We are ready to resume, Mr. President.
Resume.
I move that we open the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Period for amendment is in order.
We're ready
For
for...
committee, I'm sorry, committee amendments, Mr. President. Committee amendments, I make a correction.
All right. The previous the period for committee amendments is in order.
We've 3 amendments, Mr. President, as follows. On page 2, between lines 5 and 6, to insert a new section as Section 4 with the subtitle Appropriations, to read as follows. The Secretary of Education shall immediately include in the department's programs the operation of the Misamis Occidental Sports Academy, funding of which shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection here? None.
On the same page 2, to add a new section as Section 5 on implementing rules and regulations, or IRR, to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the Provincial Government of Misamis Occidental, and the Government of the City of Oroquieta, shall promulgate their necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this Act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The third amendment is for a omnibus renumbering of the sections, Mr. President. I so move.
So renumbered.
There are no more committee amendments, Mr. President.
Period for committee amendments is terminated.
I move that you open the period for individual amendments, Mr. President.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there are no members who have signified their intent to propose individual amendments.
So I move that we close the period of individual amendments, Mr.
Period
President.
for individual amendments is terminated.
And I move that we approve House Bill number 4292 under Committee Report number 67 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. Measure is approved on second reading.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4308 under Committee Report number 101. This is the bill on Davao Sports Academy, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none.
The
Consideration motion is in order.
The parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered his sponsorship speech last May 13, 2015. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Move that we recognize Senator Angara, the
Senator
sponsor.
Angara is recognized for the period of interpellation.
We just have two amendments, Mr. President, as follows.
Amendment,
On the, sorry, Mr.
So
President, I'm in a rush. There are no members, Mr. President, who
So
have
there being no
signified.
interpellation, Mr. President, I move that we close the period for interpellation.
So closed.
And I move that we open the period for committee amendments, Mr. President, for the same
Committee
measure.
amendments are in order.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. The committee has two amendments as follows. On the page 2 of House Bill 4308, to add a section as Section 5 with the subtitle Implementing Rules and Regulations, to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the Provincial Government of Davao del Norte, and the Government of the City of Tagum, shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this Act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move.
With the permission of the Chamber, can I have a 1 minute suspension?
Bakit may Tagum City? Bakit kasama ang government of City of Tagum?
No. Sunny, you have to read that.
Ganun pa. We are ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, after having conferred with the leadership and the Majority Leader, I withdraw my said motion.
Motion is withdrawn.
Mr. President, we have some anterior amendments. On page 1, section 1, line 2, to delete the words cultural center and to replace with the words tourism complex. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
On the same page, Mr. President, and same page and section, lines 2 to 3, to insert the words Del Norte Regional between the words Davao and sports. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, between lines 7 and 8, insert a new section as section 4 with the subtitle Appropriations to read as follows, and the number of the succeeding section to be renumbered accordingly. The Secretary of Education shall immediately include in the department's programs the operation of the Davao Sports Academy, the funding which shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Oh, we take out Talisi. Yes, sir. Okay. Mr. President, on page 2, to insert another new section as section 5 with the subtitle Implementing Rules and Regulations to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the provincial government of Davao del Norte, shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The last amendment, Mr. President, last committee amendment is to renumber the sections accordingly. I so move.
Approved.
There are no more committee amendments, Mr.
What
President.
about the title? You have amended the body. The title should reflect the contents of the body of the bill. The committee report contains an amendment to the title of the measure, which should be submitted to the body for approval.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The title shall read as follows: An act establishing the Davao del Norte Regional Sports Academy to be located in the Davao del Norte Sports and Tourism Complex and allocating funds therefore. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
No more committee amendments, Mr. President.
I move that we close the period of committee amendments, Mr. President.
So closed.
Similarly, there are no individual amendments. No members who have indicated their desire to propose individual amendments.
So I move also that we close the period of individual amendments, Mr. President.
Period for individual amendments terminated.
Thus, I move that we approve House Bill number 4308 under Committee Report number 101 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved. Second reading.
What's next?
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4605 under Committee Report number 121. This is the bill on the Alonzo Sports Academy and Training Center.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration motion in order.
The parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered his sponsorship speech last May 13, 2015. I thus move that we open the period of interpellations.
The period for interpellation is in order.
And I move that we recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Angara.
Senator Angara is recognized.
We're ready, Mr. President, but no member similarly has indicated a desire to interpellate.
There being no interpellation,
Just for the record, the agenda for today indicates that Senator Sergio Arossueña III reserved the right to interpellate. I assume that he was here earlier and therefore he has manifested that he will no longer interpellate.
Well,
Just for the record.
Per his indication, Mr. President, I think his questions earlier were intended for all of the bills, and I think he was satisfied with the answer and with putting on the record that he doesn't want every single congressional district to have a sports academy.
All right. With that, any objection to the termination of the period for interpellation? There being none, period for interpellation is terminated.
I move that we open the period for committee amendments, Mr.
Period
President.
for committee amendments is in order.
There are a few committee amendments, Mr. President, as follows. On page 1, line 7, section 2, to insert the words Province of Cavite with the between the words the and municipality. I so move.
Any objection? Approved.
On page 2, line 1, to insert the words Province of Cavite with the between the words the and municipality.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On page 2, line 7, section 3, to insert the phrase and by other funds that may be allocated by the province of Cavite between the words Alfonso and. So move.
Approved.
On page 2, between lines 9 and 10, insert a new section, a section 4, with subtitle Appropriations to read as follows, and the number of the succeeding section to be renumbered accordingly. The Secretary of Education shall immediately include in the department's programs the operation of the Alonzo Sports Academy and Training Center, the funding of which shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move. Mr. Mr. President, on the same page 2, to add a new section as Section 5 on implementing rules and regulations to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the Provincial Government of Cavite, and the Municipality of Alfonso, shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this Act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
And the last amendment is to renumber the sections accordingly, Mr. President. I so move.
Approved. Majority Leader.
So I move that we close the period of committee amendments, Mr.
The
President.
period for committee amendments terminated.
And at the same time, we should now open the period for individual amendments, Mr. President.
Individual amendments terminated.
No individual amendments, Mr. President,
So
Mr. Majority Leader.
I thus move that we close the period for individual amendments, Mr. President.
Period for individual amendments terminated.
So I move that we approve House Bill number 4605 under Committee Report number 121 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none. House Bill number 4, is it 44?
4605, Mr. President.
4605, under Committee Report number 121, is hereby approved on second reading.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4461 under Committee Report number 122. This is the bill on the Talisi Sports Academy and Training Center, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the motion is in order.
The parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered his sponsorship speech last May 13, 2015. I thus move that we open the period for interpellations.
Period for interpellation is in order.
We're ready, Mr. President, but likewise, aside from Senator Osmeña's earlier clarifications, there are no other members who wish to propound questions.
There being no interpellation, Mr. President, I move that we terminate the period for interpellations.
So terminated.
I move that we open the period for committee amendments.
So opened.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. We have a number of committee amendments. On page 1, line 5, section 2, to insert the words province of Cebu with the between the words the and the city. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
On the same page, line 9, to insert the words province of Cebu with the between the words the and city. I so move.
Approved.
Mr. President, on page 2, between lines 6 and 7, to insert a new section as section 4 with subtitle appropriations to read as follows, and the number of the succeeding section to be renumbered accordingly. Secretary of Education shall immediately include in the department's programs the operation of the Talisi Sports Academy and Training Center, the funding of which shall be included in the annual General Appropriations Act. So move.
Approved.
On the same page 2, to add a new section as section 5 on implementing rules and regulations to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the Provincial Government of Cebu, and the City Government of Talisi, shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this Act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move. Last amendment is to renumber the sections accordingly, Mr. President. I so move.
Approved.
No other committee amendments, Mr. President.
I move, Mr. President, that we terminate the period for committee amendments.
So terminated.
I move that we open the period for individual amendments.
Period
No.
for individual amendments is in order.
No individual amendments, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader.
I move that we close the period for individual amendments,
Period
Mr.
for
President.
individual amendments is terminated.
I move that we approve House Bill number 4461 under Committee Report number 122 on second reading.
Any objection? Hearing none, House Bill 4461 under Committee Report 122 is hereby approved on second reading.
Do we, So I move, Mr. President, that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4461 under Committee Report number 122.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 4307 under Committee Report number 123. This is the bill on the Siargao Island Sports Academy and Training Center.
In order.
The parliamentary status is that the sponsor had delivered the sponsorship speech last May 13, 2015. I thus move that we open the period for interpellations.
Interpellation is in order.
Ready, Mr. President, but no members signify their intent to interpellate.
I move that we close the period for interpellations, Mr. President,
So terminated.
and move at the same time that we now open the period for committee amendments.
The period for committee amendments is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader. On page 2, between lines 6 and 7, to insert a new section as section 4 with subtitle Appropriations to read as follows, and the number of the succeeding sections renumbered accordingly. Secretary of Education shall immediately include in the department's programs the operation of the Siargao Island Sports Academy and Training Center, the funding which shall be included in the Annual General Appropriations Act. I so move.
Move.
On the same page 2, Mr. President, to add a new section as section 5 on implementing rules and regulations to read as follows. The PSC, in coordination with the Department of Education, DepEd, the Provincial Government of Siargao del Norte, and the Municipality of Davao, shall promulgate the necessary rules and regulations for the implementation of this act within 90 days after its enactment into law. I so move.
Move.
Last amendment, Mr. President, is to renumber the sections accordingly. I so move.
Move. This is on page 2, line 7. The number section 4, section 6.
Yes.
I move that we close the period for committee amendments, Mr.
So
President.
terminated. So closed.
And we open the period for individual amendments.
Approved.
No more individual amendments, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader.
So in that case, Mr. President, I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
So closed.
And I move that House Bill number 4307 under Committee Report number 123 be approved on second reading.
In objection, hearing none, House Bill 4307 under Committee Report 123 is approved on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like
Aye.
to thank the Majority Leader also for helping expedite the passage of such measures.
And I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 4307
So
under Committee
suspended.
Report number 123.
Mr. President, we have another item on the agenda. This is the Youth Participation in the Risk Reduction and Management Act. For the record, no members have signified their intent to interpolate, but Senator Aquino, the sponsor, has signified his desire that it be taken up tomorrow.
Noted.
So there being no other measures to take up, Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, June 3, 2015.
Session is adjourned until Wednesday, June 3, 2015, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.